Picture a dimly lit stage in a smoky Seattle club sometime in the mid-1980s. The crowd is buzzing in anticipation, half of them with battered flannel shirts and the other half sporting thrift store jackets. Suddenly, a tall young man with intense eyes strides up to the microphone. The moment he lets out that first vocal note, raw, haunting, and impossibly resonant, an electric shock ripples through the room. That voice would soon help reshape American rock, propelling one of the defining sounds of the 1990s into the ears of millions around the world. And though his musical achievements still echo decades later, Chris Cornell's life wasn't just another rock star success story. It was a patchwork of childhood confusion, personal reinvention, staggering career triumphs, heartbreaking struggles, and a final chapter that sent waves of grief and shock through fans across the planet. The man we now know as Chris Cornell was born Christopher John Boyle on July 20th, 1964, in Seattle, Washington. This was no ordinary Pacific Northwest childhood. His father, Edward F. Boyle, was an Irish Catholic pharmacist. His mother, Karen, née Cornell, an accountant and a self-proclaimed psychic from a Jewish background. The family tree was already a bundle of eclectic roots, Irish Catholic meets Jewish clairvoyant. That curious blend found its way into Chris's psyche from an early age, though perhaps not in a straightforward or comfortable manner. His parents eventually divorced, and when that marriage came undone, the children opted to take their mother's maiden name, Cornell. Chris's father, for all his earlier influence, would have less and less contact with him as time went on. From that moment, Christopher John Boyle effectively vanished. Chris Cornell, the future rock legend, came into being. He was, by many accounts, a shy, introspective kid. He studied at Christ the King, a Catholic elementary school, where he got a small taste of performance, singing One Tin Soldier to an audience. The nuns and teachers may have expected an obedient choir boy, but Chris was already a restless spirit. According to Cornell, by 7th grade, he'd started to question religion so often and so bluntly that his mother decided it was time to yank him out of Catholic school altogether. This was classic Chris, the unwavering curiosity, the refusal to accept dogma or tradition just because someone else said so. At the same time, deeper troubles brewed beneath that inquisitive exterior. Like many kids who come from a fractured family background, Chris faced internal storms. Depression sank its claws into him at a surprisingly young age. By his teens, he was skipping out on Shorewood High School, eventually dropping out entirely. He recalled long periods of reclusiveness, times he barely stepped outside. Anxiety choked his interactions with the world, and it was only through rock music that he found a vent for his fear and isolation. Even before that love affair with rock took full shape, music, especially the Beatles, proved a beacon. At age 9, rummaging through an abandoned record collection next door, Chris stumbled on the Beatles' entire discography. For 2 solid years, he obsessively absorbed their songs. Within that swirling tapestry of pop genius, he found Little Richard's influence as channeled by the Beatles. It was one of his earliest glimpses into the raw, unfiltered energy that rock could deliver. Being an introspective teenager in Seattle long before Seattle music was even a concept didn't insulate him from the usual temptations. Between the ages of 12 and 15, Chris got acquainted with alcohol, marijuana, and various prescription drugs. The combination might have been a momentary escape from depression, but it birthed a new set of problems. A bad PCP experience at 14 left him with haunting panic attacks and a streak of agoraphobia that lingered through much of his adolescence. That said, it was also around this time that he found an outlet in drumming. His mother, recognizing the boy's yearning for expression, bought him a snare drum. Cornell would later say that music, starting with that drum, helped save his life. In the back of his mind, Chris must have known. In sound and rhythm, he found liberation. Before fame came knocking, Cornell was a regular young adult trying to survive. He worked a string of menial jobs: busboy, dishwasher, fishmonger, sous chef at a local restaurant called Ray's Boathouse. He hated some of those gigs, tolerated others, but never abandoned his dream of making music. The turning point arrived in the early 1980s, when Chris joined a Seattle-based cover band called the Shemps. That's where fate introduced him to Hiro Yamamoto, a bassist with whom he struck a chord musically and personally. Even after the Shemps fizzled, their relationship persisted, and together they began jamming, writing, and evolving ideas that would soon coalesce into a new band, Soundgarden. In 1984, Soundgarden officially formed, featuring Cornell, Yamamoto, and guitarist Kim Thayil. If you can picture the scene, a cramped basement practice area, rainy Seattle nights, the amp cords strewn over stained carpets. This was the primordial soup that birthed grunge. Initially, Cornell sang and played drums simultaneously, showing glimpses of the multi-instrumental talent that would define his reputation. But after they recruited drummers Scott Sundquist and later Matt Cameron, Cornell was free to step out front as a vocalist, an arena where he truly belonged. The band's initial recording slipped onto a compilation called Deep Six, courtesy of CZ Records. In that relatively obscure local release, a few thousand fans heard something new. The fusion of gritty, Sabbath-influenced heaviness with Cornell's soaring, soulful wail. It was a blueprint for what would blow up the music world by the 1990s. Early days in a rising band aren't exactly glamorous. They signed first with SST, an indie label, for their debut album Ultra Mega OK in 1988. That title alone was a wink at the band's self-deprecating approach. Unexpectedly, Ultra Mega OK drew a 1990 Grammy nomination for Best Metal Performance, a sign the industry was starting to notice. Soon, Soundgarden became the first grunge group to leap to a major label, A&M Records, and in 1989 they dropped Louder Than Love. The music press started buzzing about Seattle's grunge scene, a label the local bands mostly hated. Hiro Yamamoto left after the album's release, replaced by a short-lived Jason Everman, who also had a fleeting stint with Nirvana, before Ben Shepherd took over bass duties for good. This new lineup found synergy that set the stage for the band's commercial breakthrough. By the early 90s, grunge was no longer an underground curiosity. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains were shaking up mainstream rock, and Soundgarden was right there in the thick of it. Their 1991 album Bad Motorfinger exploded with tracks like Jesus Christ Pose, Outshined, and Rusty Cage. Cornell's voice soared between brooding baritones and scalding shrieks, while the band's sludgy riffs cut through the radio airwaves in a way that felt radical. The album landed them a Grammy nomination and brought them an MTV presence. By now, the flannel shirts, the long hair, the taciturn Seattle cool had become the style du jour. But Soundgarden also had real musical chops, an almost progressive approach to riff structures, and Cornell's dynamic range that stood out even in a crowded field. Then came the unstoppable wave of Super Unknown in 1994. This was the album that finally catapulted them to the absolute top. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, turning songs like Spoon Man and Black Hole Sun into global hits. The band took home 2 Grammys, and the record sold quintuple platinum in the U.S. alone. In many ways, 1994 represented the apex of that entire Seattle scene, and for Cornell, it proved that his artistry had blossomed from the shy, troubled teen into a full-throated rock icon. but as with many creative peaks, tensions lingered behind the scenes. By the time they recorded Down on the Upside in 1996, band members wanted different things. The album had a more experimental vibe, with less heaviness than earlier works. Critics were mostly positive, but friction among the band was rising to a fever pitch. In 1997, they disbanded. No dramatic meltdown, but creative conflict and personal tension had grown too heavy. Cornell, who'd poured so much of himself into Soundgarden, faced a new challenge: forging a solo path in a world that largely associated him with the group. Around this time, personal problems also took their toll. He battled severe depression, acknowledging a long history of substance issues, and his marriage to Susan Silver was heading into rocky territory. He checked himself into rehab, confronting what he described as spiraling alcohol and prescription drug dependence. Even from that low ebb, Cornell's musical spark never died out. In 1998, he began crafting songs for what became his first solo album, Euphoria Morning, co-written with Alan Johannes and Natasha Schneider from the band 11. Released in September 1999, Euphoria Morning showcased a more introspective Cornell, less about the blistering guitar assault, more about melodic nuance and vulnerable lyricism. Critics applauded his voice, though commercial success was modest. A single, Can't Change Me, earned a Grammy nomination, but fans were still adjusting to Cornell without Soundgarden's heavy riffs behind him. He was no less of a talent, but the shift in sound proved a bit jarring for some longtime listeners. But just as Cornell was finding his feet as a solo artist, an unexpected opportunity knocked. The legendary rap rock outfit Rage Against the Machine had lost their vocalist Zach De La Rocha, leaving Tom Morello, Tim Comerford, and Brad Wilk effectively frontmanless. A mutual friend, producer Rick Rubin, introduced them to Cornell. Initially, this seemed like a bizarre combination: Cornell's melodic, emotional style set against the rap metal thunder of Rage's instrumentation. But their chemistry was undeniably potent. They eventually christened the group Audioslave, unveiling their self-titled debut in November 2002. Singles like Cochise, Like a Stone, and Show Me How to Live soared up the charts. At first, rumors swirled that Cornell might flake out. He reportedly went to rehab around that same time, but he emerged stronger, and the album became a multi-platinum juggernaut. Audioslave's second record, Out of Exile, 2005, debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, further cementing Cornell's status as a magnetic frontman who could bridge alt-metal ferocity with soulful vocal lines. The crowning moment for Audioslave in many people's eyes came later in 2005 when they performed a historic free open-air show in Cuba, becoming the first American rock band to do so. For Cornell, it was another pinnacle, a moment that underscored music's power to transcend political divides. Still, internal issues gnawed at the group. They dropped a third album, Revelations, in 2006, but Cornell's desire to pursue further solo ventures and his ongoing friction with bandmates spelled doom. On February 15, 2007, he formally quit, citing irreconcilable personality conflicts. That same year, Cornell brought out his second solo record, Carry On. It included You Know My Name, the theme from the James Bond film Casino Royale, as well as covers like Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. Critically, reactions were mixed, but it fared better on the charts than Euphoria Morning. One of Cornell's more controversial career moves arrived in 2009 with the release of Scream, a collaboration with super producer Timbaland. The album veered unapologetically into pop and R&B, leaving many rock fans bewildered. Some lambasted it as a betrayal of Cornell's grunge heritage, though commercial results were decent. Amid all this reinvention, talk began circulating about a possible Soundgarden reunion. Over the years, the band's legacy had only grown, fueled by younger fans who discovered Bad Motor Finger and Super Unknown as timeless classics. Cornell fanned the flames in January 2010 with a tweet hinting that the 12-year break is over. Sure enough, that spring, Soundgarden staged a stealthy secret show under the pseudonym Nuda Dragons, then headlined Lollapalooza. By late 2012, they'd produced King Animal, their first studio album in 16 years. It wasn't Super Unknown level success, but fans rejoiced at the prospect of seeing the classic lineup back on stage. Parallel to the Soundgarden revival, Cornell embarked on intimate acoustic tours called songbook shows, performing stripped-down versions of his entire catalog, from Temple of the Dog tunes to Audioslave hits. It revealed his voice in its barest form, mesmerizing audiences who realized just how powerful Cornell's singing could be without a wall of distortion. He released a live acoustic album titled Songbook in 2011. Critics praised the rawness and warmth, highlighting that Cornell was more than a rock shouter. He was a genuine singer-songwriter, capable of emotional subtlety and heartbreakingly quiet moments. Beyond the spotlight, Chris Cornell had philanthropic passions. He performed at the Commander-in-Chief's Ball in 2013, supported various charities, and formed the Chris and Vicky Cornell Foundation in 2012 to aid underprivileged children. Toward the end of his life, he also championed refugee relief. His final film-related track, The Promise, was dedicated to helping displaced people, a cause he felt strongly about. It seemed Cornell had reached a comfortable balance between creative pursuits, activism, and fatherhood. He was married a second time. His first marriage to Susan Silver ended in 2004, and he then wed Vicky Karayanis, with whom he had 2 children, Tony and Christopher Nicholas. He also remained close to his daughter Lillian Jean from his first marriage. Yet for all the success, the shadow of depression never fully lifted. Cornell often admitted his battles with anxiety, addiction, and mental health, stating that these struggles underpinned much of his lyrical content. The cyclical nature of addiction was something he grappled with repeatedly. Nonetheless, few fans expected the terrible news that broke in May 2017. Soundgarden was back on tour, and on May 17th they played a show at the Fox Theater in Detroit. That night, Cornell performed with gusto, but the following morning he was found unresponsive in his hotel bathroom by his bodyguard. Attempts at CPR failed, and authorities pronounced him dead in the early hours of May 18th. The Wayne County Medical Examiner ruled the death a suicide by hanging. While toxicology reports noted prescription drugs in his system, the dosage was reportedly within therapeutic limits. The heartbreak was immediate and widespread. Tributes poured in from every corner of the rock universe. Fans gathered outside venues, leaving flowers, candles, handwritten notes. The Space Needle in Seattle went dark in his honor. Musicians across genres posted emotional farewells on social media. At his funeral at Hollywood Forever Cemetery on May 26, 2017, luminaries from the entire Seattle scene, along with big names from across the industry, attended to pay final respects. One of the most wrenching moments saw Chester Bennington of Linkin Park, a close friend of Cornell's, singing Hallelujah. Tragically, Bennington himself died by suicide just 2 months later, on what would have been Cornell's 53rd birthday, further underscoring the epidemic of mental health crises in the rock world. Even in death, Chris Cornell's legacy reverberated strongly. Kim Thayil stated that without him, Soundgarden couldn't continue, effectively ending the band a second time. Temple of the Dog, the supergroup Cornell formed with members of Pearl Jam to honor the late Andrew Wood, got renewed interest. Fans re-listened to the entire Cornell discography, from the grit of Louder Than Love to the experimental pop of Scream, discovering just how versatile he truly was. A statue was unveiled in Seattle in 2018, capturing him in a pose that reflected his iconic stage presence. That same year, a posthumous cameo appeared on an album called Johnny Cash, Forever Words, featuring a track where Cornell set lyrics to a Cash poem, one last testament to his wide-ranging curiosity. Looking back, it's difficult to overstate Cornell's influence on modern rock. He was part of the first wave of grunge, co-launching a seismic shift in 1990s popular music. That alone would secure his place in history. But he was also a restless innovator who managed to front not one, but two mainstream successful bands, Soundgarden and Audioslave, plus undertake multiple solo experiments. In each project, his voice stood front and center, a 4-octave range that could pivot from a tender whisper to an earth-shaking howl in a heartbeat. If you ask fellow musicians, everyone from Eddie Vedder and Dave Grohl to younger alt-rock artists, they'll tell you that Cornell's vocal style remains one of the gold standards for expressive rock singing. He was also, at heart, a thoughtful songwriter. The lyrics to Black Hole Sun, Fell on Black Days, and Like a Stone revealed a man grappling with existence, spirituality, mortality, and love. He could be cryptic, but behind the metaphors lay raw emotional honesty. In interviews, he sometimes alluded to the depression that tinted his worldview, admitting that the songs were part autobiography, part universal reflection. This duality, rock god on stage, sensitive poet at home, helped him connect with fans who recognized themselves in the struggles and triumphs he articulated. His philanthropic side was equally noteworthy. The Chris and Vicky Cornell Foundation continued after his death, reflecting his dedication to helping vulnerable kids and refugees. Cornell used his platform not just for personal gain, but to shed light on causes that needed attention, proving that even in the often self-focused music industry, true altruism could exist. In the end, what remains of Chris Cornell's story is a potent mixture of luminous art and tragic endings. We still replay Soundgarden's albums, immersed in the labyrinth of their riff-driven magic. We still marvel at those old Audioslave videos where Cornell stands at the mic, exuding a fierce confidence that belies his private torments. We revisit his acoustic songbook performances, hearing each note resonate in a hush of vulnerability. And we remember him not merely as a vocalist, but as one of the pivotal architects of an entire musical era, grunge, who somehow transcended that label to explore broader territories. The heartbreak of May 18, 2017, doesn't negate the brilliance that came before. If anything, it underscores how deeply humanity and fragility can coexist in someone so seemingly larger than life. Chris Cornell's life stands as both an emblem of alternative rock's heyday and a cautionary tale about mental health. He soared to fame as one of Seattle's iconic frontmen, but always carried a heavier burden than fans might have realized. His final moments offered a devastating reminder that success, talent, and love aren't always enough to quell the darkness within. And yet from that darkness, he bequeathed a legacy that continues to illuminate countless fans, generations of musicians, and the city he called home. In a sense, the best tribute we can offer is to keep his voice alive by playing those tracks that first made our hearts pound and our souls catch fire, by remembering that behind the legend was a man who gave everything he could to his art. And for those who hear that timeless voice for the first time, perhaps today, perhaps tomorrow, there's still that potent alchemy Chris Cornell always conjured, his personal confessions spinning into a universal roar, capturing both the majesty and fragility of being human.